Welcome to AFI DOCS Film Festival presented by AT&T. I'm Michael Lumpkin, the director of AFI Festivals. I want to start by thanking those who support the festival, our presenting sponsor, AT&T, and all of our many supporters, donors, AFI members, and you, our audience. Thank you for watching. And a special thanks as well to Meet the Press, our partner on the festival and today's world premiere of Blood on the Wall. We're here today with the directors of Blood on the Wall, Sebastian Junger and Nick Quested. Talking with Sebastian and Nick is NBC News and MSNBC Correspondent Jacob Soboroff.
Hey there, everybody. For NBC News, I'm Jacob Soboroff. You all just watched Blood on the Wall, the new film from Sebastian Junger and Nick Quested. And this film is part of the Meet the Press collection of documentaries here at AFI DOCS. For the last 3 years, AFI and Meet the Press have been collaborating and showcasing the best documentary journalism out there. I was at the festival in person last year, and it really is an extraordinary thing. And obviously, this film is just an incredible, powerful, moving, but also extraordinarily important piece of reporting. And we're living in different times right now. I'm in my backyard. We're going to do a virtual Q&A here and now. So I want to introduce the filmmakers. Sebastian is an Academy Award nominated filmmaker behind documentaries like Restrepo and the author of books, including The Perfect Storm. And Nick is a two-time Emmy-winning producer whose films include Hell on Earth. So first and foremost, I just want to say congratulations to both of you on, as I said, what's really an extraordinary film. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You know, I almost don't know where to start. The film takes you physically through Central America, into Mexico, into the United States, but it also tells you the story of how what we're looking at in some ways starts in the reverse order, how what happens in the United States affects these countries to the south. How did you all decide where to start when telling this story? Because really you could have started in any of those places. Sebastian, why don't we start with you?
Well, it's a very, very complex story, and we had several people working for us that were doing a lot of groundwork. We started doing our investigations in the United States. Of course, U.S. policy has a huge impact on Mexico, and Mexican reality has a huge impact on the U.S. and U.S. policy. They're a sort of feedback loop. And we also had people on the ground in Mexico and at Mexico's southern border, primarily Nick. I mean, Nick did just heroic work on the ground down there. And we really tried to push all the pieces forward at the same time. We didn't have a lot of time to make this film, and we really had to hustle. And we did a lot of interviews with academics and diplomats to get the sort of deep story, even though most of those interviews, you know, they're not even going to be in the film, but you need that insight, you need that information.
Nick, let me ask you about that. I mean, you were on the ground. At what moment did you decide that this was a film that needed to be made? The caravan that President Trump talked so often about, or the caravans, I should say, make up kind of a spine or a central feature of the film. But was that the moment in time where you decided that this was a story that needed to be told?
Well, we wanted to tell the story. The president had vilified Mexicans and Central Americans so much that we wanted to really personify what was, what was the reality of what immigrants are. So we'd done our research and we'd found families in San Pedro Sula, and we'd found families from Guatemala, and we'd found southern Mexican families that were planning the trip north. But when we turned up, we were researching another massacre in Mexico in Actial, and we were planning to go to Tapachula, and then the caravan started, and we were like, well, the caravan has to be the focus of the, we have to examine what this caravan really means. So we literally drove, National Geographic says, no travel at night, no, never separate from your security. Well, we didn't separate from the security, but we went straight. First thing we did was like drive at night from Actial to Tapachula over the mountains. And but we had to be there. We had to be there before as the caravan was forming in Tecumumán. And then we found our characters there, and then that's where we just kept on following. We were just tenacious and lucky to be, have been, in a position that National Geographic's put us in.
And, I mean, I think that's the exact right way to put it, is that you were in the perfect position. And Tapachula, of course, is the place where so many Central Americans cross into Mexico in order to make the journey to the United States. What was it like on the ground there?
Well, there was this incredible feeling of hope and optimism in the caravan. And when you're in a big crowd of 8 or 10,000 people, and they're all moving, in the same direction with the same intentions, there's an incredible feeling. And we were really, really welcomed by the crowd and protected. Like, there was never a moment that I felt in any type of jeopardy from anyone in the crowd. And everyone in Guatemala, there were families just handing out food and water to the caravan. And that changed as you went through Mexico. The attitude towards the caravan became more and more hostile the further north you went, especially after, I'm not hostile, we got hostile in the north, but it just became colder and colder emotionally and physically.
Sebastian, I want to ask you about what you were talking about the interconnectedness of all of this, of U.S. government policy to the flow of migrants coming to the United States. The film opens with someone engaged in smuggling talking about how you don't know what it's like to be me, basically. You don't know what it's like to sleep on the streets, and describe a despair that I think many people wouldn't be able to identify with. And despair, I took away as a theme that comes through in certain parts of the film, from someone who's the smuggler at the beginning, from people in the United States who are buying the drugs that are coming from many of these countries, and also from the migrants that are leaving their homelands in Central America, mostly from Central America today, or at least at the time in the film. Despair seems to be present throughout the story.
Yeah, I mean, it's part of the human condition. I mean, there's something called deaths of despair in this country. I can't remember my numbers, but it kills an enormous number of Americans, particularly middle-aged, particularly white male citizens. Suicide, depression, drugs. The despair in Mexico is the despair of living in a deeply corrupt economic system, a deeply corrupt and violent society, with little chance for the average person to sort of get ahead or even make an adequate wage. And, we tend to evaluate selling drugs or even taking drugs in moral terms, and we could do that if we want, but often selling drugs is a rational choice given a economic situation where you can't reasonably expect to advance yourself in any other way. If there wasn't the enormous drug market that there is in the United States, they wouldn't be smuggling drugs. They're smuggling drugs in the quantities that they are, not because they're walking them across the border in backpacks, but because there's corrupt border officials in the United States that are letting through truckloads of drugs. So the Mexican government and authorities on the ground in the U.S. are all in some ways benefiting from the drug trade. So, it's like if you want to solve this, you need an organic solution that tackles corruption on both sides of the border, and ultimately tackles the reason that people take drugs in the first place, which is, that you're going to have to drill down pretty deeply into societal ills to figure that one out.
Yeah, I thought that was actually particularly interesting about the film. It's such a rich and narrative and such a powerful journey that you see the migrants take in the story, but also there's a lot of policy-oriented conversations from the experts, and particularly one who said essentially what you did: until you figure out how to stop the demand for the drugs in the United States, you're not going to stop this whole interconnected system from operating.
Yeah, and too many powerful people are making money off the sale of drugs, people in this country and in Mexico, So, I mean, as long as if powerful people are making a lot of money and people who are not powerful are able to earn a living or assuage their despair with drugs, you got to be realistic. There's going to be a booming drug economy.
Nick, tell us about the specific migrants who you follow, along the journey.
Well, obviously we followed Ludi. Ludi was actually one of the first people we met when we went to Guatemala. We entered Guatemala on the rafts, the rubber rafts. There's a whole very
Almost like a
system.
big tire. It looks like a big
tire
donut
with
tire.
a pallet on it, and we landed, you know, and it goes very parallel to the official border. So you cross there, and they, you know, and it also, it's like there's the passenger section and then there's the goods section, and they've moved. You know, I crossed once, you know, on a raft with, you know, 30 cases of Corona, and then another time we saw a car being put on put on 4 of them. They put the car on there and they drove it off the other side. But the characters, as far as the characters go, we bumped into Ludi and Jorge, and right as they were swimming in the river to cool off, and we just started chatting. We bumped into Saura and Shauro. They were in a albergue in Tapachula. They didn't actually cross the river with us. They were already in Mexico, and we followed 2 other families. Angela and her 2 children, and then Jesus, who used to live in Houston and spoke English, but it wasn't, their story arcs weren't quite as illustrative of the situation as we felt Ludi and Saura and Shaura were.
The president talks about people like the ones that you followed, you said from day one, from his first speech after he came down the gold escalator, as rapists and criminals, when he was specifically talking about Mexicans. And then, you know, has since talked about the spreading of viruses and the need to secure the borders and infestations. And I mean, you name it, he has said it. Did you find, is that on their minds at all as they're making the journey? I mean, are they able to compartmentalize? Is that something that they think about?
Absolutely. His words were very present in the caravan. His, you know, in both English and Spanish, like his words get disseminated very quickly, and rumors, you know, move very quickly through the caravan too, whether they're true or, you know, whether they're true or not. It's an amazing way that information spreads virally within the caravan. And as he ratcheted up the rhetoric as the caravan got north, you felt this sort of disappointment within the caravan that, you know, they've left this life that was, you know, hyper dangerous in many cases, you know, and that they were coming to, you know, a petition for political asylum because of the dangers in their country, and they just felt their efforts were becoming less and less. The chances of them succeeding were less and less. You know, and this is on the heels of mass incarceration of children and separating children from their parents. This was a distinct policy at the time.
And they were still, you know, and they were still coming. And I saw some of those separations with my own eyes. I got to go into some of those detention centers, particularly in McAllen, Texas, and in Brownsville, Texas. And when you see, you know, what is happening there, and the fact that these migrants making the journey know that this is happening there, and they still choose to come to the United States, despite the fact that this is what has been happening there. You know, it says a lot about the situations from which they're coming, and also helps you understand the perception of who they are and what they believe versus the reality. I mean, Sebastian, what did you learn about how this is all talked about versus what the realities on the ground are, what the facts on the ground are?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of rhetoric and hot air in politics, and that shouldn't surprise us. I mean, I couldn't go to Mexico. In '98, I was kicked out by the Mexican government, investigating the massacre at Actial, where dozens of civilians were machine gunned by basically a local militia with the backing of the military. You know, the authorities wouldn't talk about that; they covered it up, and so I think, I mean, just sort of a general rule as a journalist, the reality on the ground is harsher and more embarrassing and more troubling than the reality that most governments will acknowledge. I mean, you can sort of take that as a general rule of thumb. And you know, I think the point of journalism, and for me, documentary film is journalism. It has exactly the same high standards of veracity that any print journalism does. the point of journalism is to get inside, get underneath what governments prefer you to believe because it makes their job easier, and to really understand what is actually happening in a way that does not have any political allegiance. I mean, I think a journalist is someone who's willing to disappoint their preconceptions with the truth, and that's a very, very serious task.
I mean, I think on the first day, I just want to say on the first day when we walked with the caravan from the border to Tapachula, like it's about 30 miles and it's 90 degrees plus 95, relative humidity in the high 80%. And you've got helicopters buzzing them and you've got checkpoints and you've got people trying to tell them to go back. And you knew that that walk was so hard and so long and so tiring and so brutal that if anyone was prepared to walk that far, then you knew that they were coming from a horrific situation.
You both chose as filmmakers to not, and Nick, you and I were talking about this a little bit before we started this officially in the recording here. You chose not to hide or obscure the gruesomeness of what takes place day to day in Mexico, and what lives are like for people who try to cross through it. There's violence, there's gore, and that's just the reality. Did you ever give second thought to including sort of some of those graphic images?
Well, I don't think any of the images are images that people haven't seen before. I just think that they become more poignant when you juxtapose them with characters that you're empathizing with, and I think that makes that's what feature documentary is like different from the news, because the news just presents the images as in cold context, whereas these are in context and become in a certain way more affecting.
What's it like to, I mean, and I'm you couldn't have possibly been there for all of that, but how are you affected going on this journey with these migrants, Nick?
I wasn't there. The caravan took about 2 months, so I left for 10 days and then came back, and then left for another 7 days and then came back for the last crossing, for the last section in Tijuana. But then we had someone there the whole time. How did it affect me? I found this is something that with then Sebastian will speak to this too, is that the real problems people face on a daily basis, like on the caravan, it's very hard to come back to a modern lifestyle in the United States with all the luxury that we have, and then hear about people's insignificant problems. When people are not eating or walking to survive or living on a handout of rice and beans, and people are talking about, well, someone's, I didn't get the right parking spot at work, or I don't know, whatever the triviality is. I find that I've become very short, and it takes me a while to readjust.
Sebastian?
Yeah, I mean, people are petty if they can get away with it, and as the situation gets worse, they stop being petty and they start being realistic. And if you took a bunch of Americans that were complaining about stupid stuff and dropped them into a survival situation, they would grow up pretty fast. They would grow up in hours even and deal with the situation. But I just want to reiterate Nick's point. I mean, if people are walking 1,000 miles in the heat to escape a place, they're not doing that because they think they can take advantage of the American welfare system. They're doing that because their lives are in danger, and not even that. Some people are okay enduring hardship, enduring danger. But what no one can tolerate, and those of you who are parents will know this, what no one can tolerate is hardship and suffering and danger for their children. And when that starts to happen, people start fleeing. And when they do that, you have to look at the hardship they're enduring as evidence of how bad things are back home. And if you want to build a wall, you can, but if you don't fix those problems back home, wherever that home is for those people, you will always have to guard your country against outsiders coming in. And there's a better way. There's a more humane way, I think.
Well, let's talk about that. Why is it that we, as a collective, I guess, humanity, are okay with, or too many people are okay with the way things are? That people are starving to death, and because of climate change and instability in places like Central America and the dry corridor, or people are dying in massacres in Mexico, or some of the most violent cities in Mexico are Tijuana or Reynosa, or Ciudad Juarez along the border. But then just on the other side in the United States are some of the safest big cities, in America. It all just seems like it shouldn't be this way, yet the government seemed to be complacent about the way things are.
Well,
I think
capitalism, sorry, can I just address that one?
Yeah.
Capitalism is based on having the exploitation of the proletariat, wherever it may be. So Americans are comfortable with this colonial imperialistic attitude of exploiting black and brown people for their economic benefit.
And if you want to look at the history of this country, we supported a lot of right-wing regimes in Central and South America. Right-wing regimes are stable for a little while, and they create a huge amount of chaos and instability. And that's one of the things that those sort of blowback that we're experiencing right now. And Nick knows more about this, but at one point, a lot of Salvadoran gang members were rounded up and expelled from the country from Los Angeles, and they wound up back in Salvador. And that created such a situation of violence and instability that people started fleeing. And a lot of those people wound up in caravans that wound up in this country. So, policies have repercussions, and even well-intentioned governments, which I think our government often is, even well-intentioned governments can't play that chess game out very many moves very, very accurately.
I think you make a really good point, and I know we're coming up against the end here, but I think you're referencing MS-13, Mara Salvatrucha, and also the 18th Street Gang, Barrio 18, which both come from here in the city of Los Angeles and were deported during the Clinton administration to Central America. Basically exported the violent street gangs, many of which you see there now, and are causing people to flee. I guess my question for either of you is, how much of what we're seeing, a lot of the finger pointing goes on, as you said, Nick, at the brown people coming here, the way that the Trump administration or the president talks about it. But how much are we to blame? How much is United States policy to blame for the current situation that we're in, based on your examination of this?
The current policy, I think the current policy is in a horrific way to deal with the problem of immigration. I don't think it actually deals with, as Sebastian says, it's not dealing with the supply side, it's dealing with demand. So if you want to suppress if you want to reduce the amount of people who are immigrating north, you need to provide better working conditions, and you need a Marshall Plan for Central America. You need to look at the Americas holistically and say, how can I better help the Americas generally in order to reduce the amount of immigration? But I don't think we're going to see that happening until November. So.
Yeah, go ahead. No, November 2020 or November 2024. I guess we don't know.
Well, that's right.
Before we go, just Sebastian, I mean, both of you have had so many different experiences all over the world. How did this compare? I mean, how did, I know you couldn't be there, Sebastian, but how does this one compare to your other documentaries you've been able to do, and sort of some of the themes that have emerged here?
My contribution was helping with the directing and editing in New York. So, all my other documentaries, virtually all of them, I was on the ground shooting. Mm-hmm. This was a very, very different experience for me. And I got to say, because I was not involved physically, the disturbing material was even more disturbing in some ways, because I felt sort of guilty that I was participating in. It was a very weird psychology.
Nick?
I mean, I think each time you make a film, you're in a different, well, for us, we get to make them in different environments. So I was, I don't know, I become energized and despondent, and at the same time, it sort of comes through. I think Acapulco was enormously shocking to me. Like it was, Acapulco was as scary as any place I've ever been. Like we were working with Ruben and Carlos, and someone came up and took our pictures and then posted them on a narco Facebook page. And we were followed, not by the police this time, but like by, just a nondescript car. And you're like, and so, you start to think, well, that's could be a bad situation. So Ruben and Carlos directly addressed, they knew the person who ran the page, and they were like, no, this is not the guys to be doing this to. But still, that was an eye-opening experience.
As is, I should say, the whole film. And I'm grateful for you guys for taking the time to do this. And I just wanted to take this time to congratulate you both again for spending time with us, for being here for the festival, and wishing you all the best. Good luck with Blood on the Wall.
Thank you so much, Jacob.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.